It is time to permanently destroy a dangerous myth. You've been told that if you just show enough understanding, if you just offer enough healing love, you can save the abuser and fix the relationship. This is a lie that will destroy you. The manipulator is not a wounded child desperately seeking love. They are a highly adapted psychological parasite, actively seeking a host. You cannot heal a parasite. You can only starve it. Right now, you're trapped in the compassion trap. It feels like empathy, but it is actually a mechanism of profound self-destruction. Every time you try to understand their cruelty, you absorb their toxic projections. If you continue to do this tonight, tomorrow your nervous system will remain locked in a state of high cortisol panic, inching you ever closer to total systemic shutdown. The bleeding must be stopped this very second. We are going to use the clinical framework of Carl Jung to build an inescapable trap for the predator. I'm going to show you how to construct the mirror chamber, a psychological state of absolute, impenetrable reflection. We will learn how to stop absorbing their darkness and instead force them to choke on their own repressed toxicity, resulting in their inevitable, devastating collapse. You are sitting on the examination table in a sterile doctor's office. You list the symptoms: chronic fatigue that sleep doesn't cure, thick brain fog, a heart that races for no logical reason. The doctor runs the comprehensive blood panels. The results come back completely perfect. You are physically healthy. And then, the terrifying realization finally sets in. The sickness is not in your body. It is in your environment. You are being psychologically consumed by a predator operating in plain sight. To understand this, we must examine a terrifying paradox. Why does the mere presence of certain individuals cause your biological nervous system to fail, even when no physical threat exists? The answer is that the psychological predator does not operate through overt physical violence. They operate through a mechanism of psychic vampirism. They literally require a host to stabilize their own incredibly fragile internal architecture. In Jungian psychology, the abuser is understood to be entirely possessed by a false persona, a grandiose, artificially inflated mask of superiority and control. This mask is not their true self. It is a desperate defense mechanism. To keep this fragile mask from cracking, they must continuously purge their own deep-seated inadequacies, fears, and shame. They cannot process these emotions internally, because doing so would destroy the persona. This purging is not an accident or a momentary lapse in judgment. It is a vital, non-negotiable metabolic process for the manipulator. Because they lack the psychological machinery to digest their own guilt or shame, they must outsource the processing of these toxic emotions to you. They need a dumping ground for their psychic waste, and they have selected you for a very specific reason. Your high level of empathy is the exact vulnerability they exploit. Your willingness to understand their pain, to listen, and to offer comfort is the open door through which they dump their psychological sewage directly into your nervous system. You are not having a relationship. You are functioning as a toxic waste processing plant. And the first step to stopping it is seeing exactly how they perform the transfer. To observe this transfer in real time, we must leave the bright lights of the clinic and step into the suffocating reality where this transaction actually occurs. It is 2 a.m. in a cramped city apartment. Chloe sits at the kitchen table, her voice shaking, desperately trying to explain why she is hurt by a betrayal. Marcus sits across from her, sipping water. He looks at her with cold, detached amusement, a perfectly calibrated mask of superiority. He does not yell. Instead, he calmly tells her she is overreacting. He twists her timeline, invalidates her memory, and slowly turns the narrative upside down until she is the one apologizing for his offense. Chloe feels physically sick. Her stomach drops and her hands tremble. She is actively absorbing a profound, paralyzing shame. But here is the brutal truth. That shame does not belong to her. She is carrying the psychological weight of his crime. This brings us to a terrifying clinical question. How does the abuser manage to commit a transgression, yet force you to physically carry the guilt of that exact offense? The answer lies in a highly destructive psychological mechanism known as projective identification. This is an insidious, unconscious process where the manipulator literally projects their unintegrated shadow, their suppressed malice, their incompetence, and their deep-seated shame directly onto you. Understand the distinction. Simple projection is when someone secretly hates themselves and merely accuses you of hating yourself. It is a verbal defense. But projective identification is a weaponized behavioral loop. It is a coercive dance. Marcus remains perfectly, unnaturally calm, creating an energetic vacuum that forces Chloe to act out the projected role. He makes her embody the hysteria, the instability, and the guilt that he is secretly terrified he possesses. When you absorb this violent projection, you suffer from a condition known as ego-depletion. Your ego, the part of your psyche responsible for navigating reality and maintaining your boundaries, is systematically dismantled under the relentless barrage of corrupted data. You lose the ability to trust your own senses. Slowly, inevitably, you begin to view yourself entirely through the distorted, toxic lens that the abuser has forced over your eyes. This is the true anatomy of gaslighting. It is not simply lying about where they were or what they said. It is the deliberate, methodical destruction of the victim's ontological security. Ontological security is your fundamental bedrock confidence in your own memory, your perception of reality, and your basic right to exist. Marcus is not just trying to win an argument in that kitchen. He is actively erasing Chloe's reality to ensure his own survival. By forcing Chloe to become the container for his own psychological rot, Marcus walks away from the kitchen table feeling lighter, vindicated, and powerful. The metabolic process of the parasite is complete. The toxic waste has been successfully transferred. Chloe is left exhausted, staring at the wall, convinced that she is the problem. But this dynamic is not limited to romantic partners. It infects every structure where power is imbalanced. This parasitic infection spreads far beyond the boundaries of a cramped apartment kitchen. We step into the harsh, glaring fluorescent light of a sterile, open-plan corporate office. Ethan is standing rigidly at his manager's desk. His boss, Richard, has just spectacularly missed a critical quarterly deadline, entirely due to his own profound incompetence and disorganization. But instead of taking accountability, Richard deploys the exact same psychological weapon Marcus used. Richard sighs heavily, looks at Ethan with a perfectly crafted expression of disappointment, and expresses deep concern over Ethan's lack of dedication to the team. Ethan's jaw tightens. He feels a sudden, boiling rage at the glaring injustice of the corporate hierarchy. Yet he swallows it entirely. He nods, accepts the unearned guilt, and silently promises to work straight through the weekend. The toxic transfer is complete. This scene forces us to confront the most uncomfortable truth of this entire dynamic, exposing the victim's own complicity in the cycle. Why do highly intelligent, incredibly capable people like Ethan willingly accept the blame for the sheer, objective incompetence of their abusers? The answer is not that you are weak. The answer is that your survival instinct has been deeply, systematically distorted. You accept the toxic projection because the illusion of control is psychologically safer than the truth. It is easier to believe, if I just work harder, if I just communicate better, he will finally be happy, than to accept the terrifying reality that you are being managed by a chaotic, malicious entity who will never be satisfied. Taking the blame gives you a false sense of agency in a fundamentally uncontrollable environment. This false agency traps you in a severe, chemically binding dopamine loop. You endure the crushing devaluation phase, desperately starving for the unpredictable, sudden hit of validation that the abuser occasionally throws you during the idealization phase. Your brain begins to process the abuse as a necessary precursor to reward. This is not a communication issue. It is a chemical addiction to a highly refined psychological poison. If you look through the lens of Carl Jung, the mechanics of this addiction become devastatingly clear. The victim actively projects an idealized archetype onto the abuser. Ethan views Richard not as the incompetent manager he is, but unconsciously elevates him to the archetype of the wise father, or the ultimate authority. By worshipping the archetype, the victim deliberately blinds themselves to the actual predator standing right in front of them. If you recognize yourself in Ethan's silent compliance, if you have ever swallowed your rage and apologized for a mistake you did not make just to keep the peace, hit the like button right now. Let it serve as a physical acknowledgement that the illusion is breaking. Subscribe to the channel to arm yourself for the next stage, because understanding your own complicity is the only way to dismantle the trap. Ethan will spend his entire weekend sacrificing his life energy to fix a problem he did not create, simply to protect Richard's fragile persona. The victim's compliance is the scaffolding that holds the abuser's world together. But what happens when we pull back the curtain and observe the predator in total isolation? What terrifying reality are they so desperately trying to outrun? To answer that, we must leave the corporate office and step into the shadows where the predator believes they are unobserved. Richard has left the building. He is sitting alone in his luxury car in the dimly lit concrete parking garage. The engine is off. The intimidating boss, the master manipulator, is gone. In the absolute silence of the car, the grandiose facade completely drops. His hands are trembling on the leather steering wheel. The crushing, suffocating terror of his own profound mediocrity washes over him. He realizes, in the deepest, unspoken part of his mind, that he is entirely hollow. He is a phantom operating a sophisticated meat suit, completely dependent on the compliance of people like Ethan to maintain the illusion of his own existence. He desperately needs someone else to carry the blame, because if he is forced to hold it himself, he will psychologically disintegrate. This exposes the ultimate truth about the mechanics of abuse. We build monsters out of our manipulators, giving them godlike power over our emotions. But look at this trembling figure in the dark. What is the single, terrifying vulnerability that the narcissist spends every second of their entire life frantically trying to outrun? The abuser's greatest terror is their own Jungian shadow. They have fundamentally failed the rigorous, painful process of individuation, the psychological journey required to build a whole, authentic identity. Because they skipped this vital development, they possess no genuine self. They are merely a highly polished, incredibly fragile shell constructed entirely to surround a black hole of inadequacy. Their towering arrogance and constant need for control are not signs of true confidence or strength. This arrogance is a desperate, highly unstable compensatory structure. It is a dam built to hold back an ocean of shame. The narcissist does not actually love themselves in any healthy sense. They are fiercely, pathologically protective of the delusion that prevents their own psychological death. This is why your compliance is a matter of life and death for them. If the victim wakes up, if you refuse to absorb the projection, the abuser faces the ultimate terror of enantiodromia. This is the catastrophic psychological reversal where the dam breaks and their own suppressed darkness violently floods their conscious mind. They are terrified that if they look in the mirror without a victim to distort the image, they will see a monster. The predator is not a dark mastermind executing a flawless, evil game of chess. They are an addict in a constant, frantic search of a psychological host to filter their poison. The toxic boss, the gaslighting partner, they are fundamentally weak mechanisms fighting a desperate war against their own emptiness. And knowing this changes everything. Without your nervous system to process their shame, they starve. This realization strips the abuser of their intimidating aura. They are not powerful. They are entirely dependent on your reaction. The question is no longer how to fight them, but how to stop feeding them. If the abuser requires your emotional response to survive their own shadow, what happens when you transform from a sponge into a surface of absolute, unyielding glass? To see what happens when that unyielding glass is finally erected, we must return to the cramped kitchen where Chloe has been trapped. It is late. Marcus launches another calculated verbal strike, a familiar phrase designed specifically to twist her perception and draw tears. He leans back, waiting for her nervous system to react, waiting for her to absorb the guilt. But this time, the entire dynamic abruptly shifts. Chloe does not engage. She does not frantically defend herself, nor does she cry. She looks at him with absolute, dead-eyed neutrality. Her face becomes a blank, reflective surface. Marcus pauses. He stammers. The suffocating calm he usually maintains begins to fracture, and a very real, very visceral panic sets in. This brings us to the ultimate tactical question. How do you completely destroy a psychological parasite without ever raising your voice or throwing a single punch? The answer is the weaponization of your own boundaries. To defeat projective identification, you must become what we can call the mirror chamber. You construct a psychological perimeter of absolute, radical detachment. You listen to the abuser's words, you acknowledge their presence, but you actively and consciously refuse to internalize a single syllable. You stop translating their toxicity into your own guilt. When you execute this radical detachment, you immediately cut off the narcissistic supply. Remember, the abuser is attempting to throw their toxic shadow at you, expecting your empathy to catch it. But because the mirror is now completely impenetrable, the projection hits the glass and bounces directly back. The metabolic transfer fails. You are no longer their psychological dumping ground, which means they are suddenly forced to swallow their own poison. This failed transfer triggers a catastrophic event known as narcissistic collapse. Denied an external host to process their deep-seated shame, the fragile ego of the manipulator literally shatters under the crushing weight of the returning shadow. The carefully constructed persona cannot withstand the pressure. The calm, superior manipulator you feared instantly devolves into a desperate, erratic, and deeply panicked child. You do not need to fight the abuser. Arguing with them only proves that their words still have power over your reality. You simply step out of the way of the projection. By doing absolutely nothing, by offering zero emotional resonance, you force the chaotic physics of their own broken psyche to destroy them from the inside out. The parasite starves because you simply closed the door. Look at Marcus in the kitchen. He is raising his voice now, trying frantically to provoke any reaction at all, but Chloe just watches him, entirely unaffected. The terror in his eyes is real, because he is finally alone with himself. The mirror chamber is the ultimate defense because it requires no aggression, only absolute stillness. But creating this stillness requires a final, profound shift in how you view your own empathy. To create that absolute stillness, you must step completely outside the dynamic. You are now standing on the street outside that cramped city apartment, or perhaps outside the corporate building. The morning air is crisp and shockingly cold. For the first time in years, you take a deep breath, and you feel the crushing physical weight finally lifted from your chest. The abuser is still inside, pacing, trapped forever in their own rotting mental architecture. But you are free. Chloe is just an example, a mirror of the battlefield you have been standing on. But your war is happening right now. For too long you have lived under the delusion that power means winning the argument, proving your innocence, or finally making them understand how much they hurt you. But true power is not the ability to win a toxic argument. True power is the absolute, terrifying sovereignty to let the toxic person destroy themselves against the walls of your detachment. To reach this level of psychological freedom, Carl Jung demands that you engage in the brutal work of individuation. You must integrate your own shadow. This means you must look in the mirror and finally accept your capacity to be cold, to be ruthless, and to be entirely emotionally unavailable to those who only wish to consume you. You are not responsible for healing the broken psychology of the world. Empathy, without impenetrable boundaries, is not a virtue. It is self-mutilation. The manipulator will eventually recover from their collapse. They will reset their fragile persona, and they will begin the frantic search for a new host to filter their poison. But the mirror chamber you have built remains locked. By refusing the projection, you have permanently reclaimed the absolute authority over your own perception of reality. You no longer need their validation to exist. If you are ready to stop absorbing the poison of others, I want you to go down to the comments right now and declare your sovereignty. Type these exact words. I am the mirror. I return what is not mine. My mind is my inner citadel, and the gates are permanently closed to parasites. Let this act be the final nail in the coffin of your complicity. And if you want to continue this ascent into psychological mastery, subscribe to the channel. You were never the broken one. You were merely the unwilling container for someone else's unacknowledged darkness. Now that the transfer is severed, the fog clears, leaving only the sharp, brilliant light of your own reality. You are no longer prey. Walk forward, guard your citadel, and never again apologize for refusing to bleed. Until next time.